All excited to hear you. All right. Homeschooling is the new normal. Welcome to our webinar this afternoon, everybody, and thank you for joining us. Homeschooling has seen exponential growth over the last few years, and we believe that due to COVID, it's even been expedited even further. And so many new parents have been contacting us as they start investigating homeschooling. My name is Sean Swartz. I'm the CEO of SK Education Solutions. We are the official office of the GED, the American GED, in both South Africa and Namibia. Today, we're very privileged to have two great panelists with us, Boa van der Eems, as well as Lindsay Calder. We're live on YouTube and have made the comments facility available for you to post your questions. So please feel free to type in your questions in the comments facility. We will be monitoring the questions, and we will try our best to ensure that our expert panelists answer your questions after their presentations. We've had many requests to run a webinar like this, and we feel that Boa, as an expert in homeschooling, is the perfect fit to share his knowledge and insights with you. So our first guest this afternoon is Boa van der Eems. He established the online platform sahomeschoolers.org, which aims to be the starting point for people interested in home education. He's also the chairman of the Pestalozzi Trust. The trust aims to distribute authoritative information in response to public inquiries relating to homeschooling. I'm sure he'll talk a lot about that in his presentation. And for the past 20 years, Boa and his wife have been homeschooling their own children. So Boa, thank you for joining us. And we're very excited for you to share your expertise with our audience. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Sean. Thank you for the opportunity to share my ideas with your audience, and I'll hope this is of value to them. So I'm gonna switch on share screen. I've got a presentation to go through, so I'll share my screen. And there we go. So can you see my first screen?
Yes, perfectly.
Okay, so I'm not saying that home education is the norm, the new normal, as Sean said. I'm asking the question: is it the new normal? We must just keep in mind, although it's had significant growth over the last year, until recently, the number of home learners as a percentage of the total school population is still below 1%. So that's still a bit far from the new normal. But I'm going to try to unpack this question. What is the old normal and how does the new normal look like, and take it from there. Okay, so let's go to my first slide. So the environment in which we live has been formed by the South African Constitution, which was adopted in 1994. And there are some important things in there that created the basis for home education, and not only home education, alternative education in general, for this to flourish. The first thing in the Constitution we must take note of is that it says every child has got the right to family care or parental care. So if you look at the word care and figure out what is the definition of care, you must go to the Children's Act, and in the Children's Act it says care also means the guiding and direction of the education of the child. So this means a child has got a right to education provided by parents or provided by the family. So this is how the constitutionally, per implication, made provision for home education and other forms of education. The second principle that we must always take into account when we talk about what is the best for the children is that the Constitution says a child's best interests are of paramount importance in every matter concerning the child. And this means for every individual child. So this gives us, if there's reason to say that home education is in the best interest of a specific child, then no other factor can override that in terms of the Constitution. Thirdly, everyone has got the right to a basic education. Basic education is basically defined as grade R to 9, or 1 to 9, I think. And everybody has got the right to establish and maintain at their own expense independent educational institutions. Now you see if I've made a few things, put them in a different color. So I'll first look at right to family care or parental care, and then the word right to a basic education and in institutions. Because after the Constitution was adopted, they introduced the SA Schools Act, and an act is supposed to realize the stuff that's in the Constitution. And let's see how they did that. So they tried to implement the principles of the Constitution by bringing out a Schools Act. So you can immediately see that that is a problem. We've got a right to education, but we implement it by means of a Schools Act. Does it mean that the school is the only way through which you can get an education? So the fact that and this gives a lot of problems, because the School Act is designed to specify how schools are run. It's not designed to specify how education should take place. So that is a fundamental flaw in our regulatory framework that was introduced in 1996. And then they said, okay, the way to realize the right to education is to introduce compulsory school attendance. This is based on the assumption that school attendance will automatically give you education, which is a flawed assumption. And I don't think we need to go into that. Then the next sentence, it says, we make provision for public or registered private schools. But the Constitution doesn't talk about schools, it talks about institutions. And institutions is something much broader than schools. And then it allows for the registration for home education. Following the Schools Act, they came up with a very restrictive home education policy, 1999. And this policy said, if you want to home educate your child, you must get approval. Remember, if you've got a right to parental care, why do you need approval for that? That a child has got a right to sustenance, a shelter, but you don't have to get approval to give your child shelter. But suddenly for education you must. So you can see that the regulatory framework introduced in 1996 by the Schools Act had significant flaws. But and this regulatory framework gave us the situation we've got now, what I call the old normal. We've got tens of thousands of children that cannot be placed in a school. The majority of children get substandard education in dysfunctional public schools. Admission to quintile 5 schools, that is the old Model C schools, is limited, long waiting lists, and then private schools are generally unaffordable. So that is the situation in which we live now, in which the majority of children live now, and that's how it was since the SA Schools Act was introduced. Okay, I'm not going. So this is just a Facebook post that I got on Facebook in 2019, which is a nice articulation how a desperate parent put this thing on Facebook, and that it just says what I was saying in the previous school. Yet, private schools are expensive, long waiting lists at Model C schools. They're looking for something else. And here is just a extract from a judgment of the Constitutional Court that says exactly the same thing. Poorly resourced public schools, well-resourced independent schools, but nobody can afford them. So what was civic society's reaction to this? Is home education has grown exponentially since 1996. Our estimates that there were about 150,000 in 2019. Because of the flaws in the regulatory framework, most home learners are not registered. And then as an outflow of home education, you had this cottage school industry emerging. And it's a logical outflow from home education. Because let's say a family starts with home education, they're very successful. Their neighbors see this and they experience problems at their school, but for some reason they can't home education. And they ask their neighbors, can I send my children to you? And there suddenly, these people are operating a school. But these schools are too small and too different to successfully register as a private school. And that's where many of these small cottage schools are not registered. And the reason for that is our regulatory framework doesn't make provision for the diversity of forms in education. So this is what happened since 1996. Home education has grown, cottage schools has grown. Now, COVID-19 happened. Home education has already been growing exponentially until COVID-19. But COVID-19 gave it a quantum leap into another league. And for what reasons? The first one is increased public acceptance. Suddenly, everybody was homeschooling. Suddenly, the media was full of home education. When we at the Pestalozzi Trust and various other organizations were flooded with media requests, and everybody was now aware of it. So that's number one. Number two is accelerated decisions. There were many parents that have been considering homeschooling, but they were just not ready to take the step yet. And the COVID-19 crisis just pushed them over the threshold to make the decisions. Number three is more parents working from home. So, and in brackets, I've got the storage inhibitor. Now, you must remember a school has got two functions. The one function is education, but the other function is storage. The school is there to look after the kid while the parents are working. And and when you've got families where the parents are outside the house most of the time, that storage function is needed to allow the parents to work outside the home. But now with COVID-19, there's been a massive increase of working from home. And now that function of the school is not needed anymore. And that makes it easier for parents to move to home education. So it's removed one of the main inhibitor of further growth of home education. The other inhibitors are called the fear inhibitor. That home education just seems such a daunting task to parents, and many parents are just too afraid. Now that they were forced to do it, And they've learned, but this is not as difficult as we thought. And they realize they're not doing much at the school anyway. I can easily do what they do at the school. And it's taken away the fear of many parents. And that has also contributed to the growth. And then the economic effects of COVID has made schools unaffordable to many parents. So these are the reasons for this quantum jump in home education. And these are now what we call real home educators, people that decide for home education on the long term. But on top of that quantum jump, there's also what we call the crisis homeschoolers. These are parents that decided to homeschool until it's safe to go back. So their long-term plan is to send the children back to school, but on the short term, for the health reasons, they keep their children at home. But as these crisis homeschoolers experience all the benefits of homeschooling, they get more confidence, they get more comfortable, and many of those parents that decided to do it as a short-term option actually make it a long-term decision. So what we've seen, the effects of COVID-19 is a quantum growth of home education. And what we'll start seeing from now on is a visible reduction of school numbers. So we'll start seeing now that not all children are returning, and it will start to become visible as all the classes are back. I think that everybody is back now. So the new normal, what can we expect going forward is a higher growth in home and alternative education. So it's not only home education where the child receives his or her education at his own home, but also cottage schools where people send their children somewhere just for 1 day or 2 days. So it's a hybrid of institutional education and home education. So we will see a growth of that has received a quantum jump and will continue to grow exponentially. But as it becomes visible that the schools are not full anymore, we will start seeing increased conflict because the teachers' unions are not going to take this lying down. And we know that the teachers' unions are very powerful in South Africa. So we expect increased conflict as teachers' unions will try to save the jobs of teachers. And that is one of the reasons why it's important to have a legal defense fund in the home education sector to handle these conflicts. And then the DBE, the Department of Basic Education, the national department, will step up efforts to get control over this new thing that currently it can't control. And then lastly, increase private sector investment. I've had many sessions with large companies that suddenly woke up that home education is the thing where things are growing, and they want to invest in that. And I think I'm not doing bad in terms. Okay, so what I've shown is that we've got a regulatory framework created by the SA Schools Act that is not suitable for this new normal anymore. So what we as the Pestalozzi Trust, and we involving yet all the home education associations with that, and we've facilitate the creation of a coalition of home education organizations. We are saying in order to accommodate this growth, we need a new regulatory dispensation. And these are the 3 principles of such a dispensation. Firstly, we don't want to be governed by a Schools Act because we're not busy with school. We are busy with education. We need an Education Act that regulates education. We can't be regulated by a Schools Act. It's like the car industry being regulated by a Trains Act, where they view a car as a a special type of train. Thirdly, being regulated by the Department of Education is a problem, because they are the dominant player in the education space. They are the operators of the public schools, and they will not treat alternative education fairly. Therefore, we need an independent education authority that will regulate all forms of education, school education and non-school education. And we need a framework that allows for a diversity of educational forms. Not only, currently it's only home education and school and nothing in between. But there's actually a spectrum of educational forms between those two. I can talk a whole presentation about that, but I'm just giving the highlights. So to latch on to GED, why I think, from my point of view, why GED is important. The alternative education industry is characterized by its diversity. And we need diversity so that parents have got choice to choose the education that's the best for their kids. And GED gives another way of achieving a matric. It increases the diversity of matric qualifications in the market, and therefore I think it's a good thing. And I hope this is true. You must decide. It creates an opportunity to go internationally. I'm not going to say what's the best matric, but I've got 3 kids that did the GED, and we had my first kid that did the GED, still did it while there was just 1 examinations center in the country. So we especially went up to Gauteng to write the exam in Sandton. So yeah, that is all from my side, and I'm slightly over time. I apologize. Stop share. I can't hear you.
Thank you so much. That was really very, very informative. Yes, before we got involved, there was only the 1 testing center in Sandton, and when we opened the office here, the first thing we did was start making the GED test available in more than 1 center. It's now, as Lindsay will, I'm sure, tell us, it's now available in over 40 centers around the country. Outside of the USA, we have the largest number of testing centers in any country. So thank you very, very much. I think it's a great and very important presentation, and people need to take it very seriously and understand what homeschooling is. Once Lindsay has presented, then we will take some questions for yourself and for Lindsay. So please, reminder to everybody out there, please type in your questions in the comments section of YouTube. We will be monitoring these questions, and we will try our best to ensure that our expert panelists answer your questions. Our second guest today is Lindsay Calder. She has worked in the education industry for over 15 years with a very special particular focus on international qualifications. And as you know, the GED is an international qualification. And so she joined the GED, but before she joined the GED 5 years ago, she also worked for Pearson as well as for City and Guilds, which I'm sure you know as well, are both international qualification awarding bodies. So Lindsay has a lot of experience in international qualifications, and we look forward to learning all about the American GED from Lindsay.
Thanks so much, Sean. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to share my screen. Okay, and I'll stop looking at it. Okay, so the GED test is a secondary school leaving certificate, And what we're going to do is we're going to look at exploring the GED test, what it is. And as Bo mentioned, it's great to have a number of options available for students, and the GED is a good option in terms of being an exit level qualification. But really, what is the purpose of the GED test? As we look at the test, it's important to remember that the purposes of the GED assessment are firstly to provide a high school credential, and by measuring whether a candidate has acquired the foundational academic skills and knowledge deemed necessary for high school exit. Now, the GED assessment can provide an alternative pathway for anyone who has not yet earned a high school diploma, or in South Africa, we'd call it a grade 12. The second thing is to provide evidence of readiness to enter workforce training programs or post-secondary education. So the GED was initially developed as a second chance opportunity, and from there it has grown. The GED assessment will look at measuring whether a candidate is ready to enter a workforce training program or a typical entry-level credit college course without needing remediation. And then it's to provide information about candidate strengths and areas of developmental need by providing more information about a candidate's proficiency on career and college readiness standards to potential employers, post-secondary advisors, and educators. And you'll see that GED often talks about the career and college readiness in its design. The GED can help candidates strengthen those areas of developmental need so that the candidates are ready for the next level of lifelong education and training. It is future focused in that it's designed to provide information about candidate readiness that is directly tied to the next steps in their preparation and training. The GED test represents a new paradigm, one in which critical thinking, problem solving, and close reading skills are required across all content areas. With the inclusion of evidence-based writing, students are expected to demonstrate both their reading and writing skills. No longer is it acceptable to write an opinion piece. Rather, students have to analyze and evaluate text, and from there, develop a claim supported by evidence drawn from what they have read. Now, the GED test is made up of 4 subjects. And what we're going to do is we're going to look a little bit closer at what each subject entails. So firstly, reasoning through language arts, or abbreviated RLA. For you and me, we know it as English. So the alignment with career and college readiness standards, the RLA test focuses on 3 essential groupings of skills: the ability to read closely, the ability to write clearly, and the ability to edit and understand the use of standard written English in context. So the RLA test assesses your ability to understand what you read and how you write clearly. You should be familiar with reading and writing concepts, including grammar, but students would not lose marks for incorrect spelling as long as you can understand the word that's trying to be said. So a student will need to read excerpts from a variety of informational and literacy sources and demonstrate your understanding, drawing conclusions and writing clearly. Through your writing, you'll be able to demonstrate your ability to analyze 2 passages, decide which argument has more convincing evidence, and explain why the evidence supports your choice. I always explain it to students as if you're a lawyer and you need to argue your case. Mathematical reasoning focuses on 2 major content areas: quantitative problem solving and algebraic problem solving. So for mathematical reasoning, you don't have to be a math mind to pass the GED maths test. You just need the right preparation. You should be familiar with math concepts, measurements, equations, and applying maths concepts to solve real life problems. You don't have to memorize formulas. You'll be given a formula sheet in the test center. You'll also have access to an on-screen calculator in the test. So when students are doing the maths test or any of the GED tests, they must note that they cannot take their own calculator into the test. They must use the on-screen calculator. Science test focuses on 3 major content areas: life science, physical science, and earth and space science. And students will need to understand science concepts, how to read graphs and charts, displaying scientific data, and use reasoning to interpret science information. The science test is also not a memorization test. For example, you won't need to memorize a periodic table of elements, but you will need to recognize names and symbols of key elements in answering some questions. And that really ties back into your critical thinking skills and applying your knowledge. You don't need to parrot learn it. You need to understand it and be able to go into the exam and apply that knowledge in certain situations. Now, social studies. The social studies test focuses on 4 major content areas: civics and government, United States history, economics, and geography and the world. Studying social studies is not so different from reading the news. So social studies gives you the context to understand the nation, the world, and society. Knowledge you'll need in many jobs and later in life. Students will need to apply social studies concepts, know how to read graphs and charts displaying social studies data, and use reasoning to interpret social studies information. Same as the other tests, social studies is not a memorization test. For example, a student won't need to memorize the capitals of countries or dates that events occurred. But given some information about an event, you might need to use that in drawing conclusions on what you've learned. Now, certification. So once a student has passed each test with 145 out of 200, they will be issued a GED high school equivalency credential issued by the Office of the State Superintendent of the Education in Washington, D.C. Students will receive their diploma and transcript electronically, but they do also receive, or they can order through their profile, is 1 hard copy of the diploma. They would just need to pick up the costs of the courier fee. So students get electronic credentials, but there's nothing to say that they can't order the hard copies, because we are still a very much paper-based nation in South Africa and Namibia. Sean touched on it a bit earlier, our external examinations. In South Africa, we have over 40 testing centers through most of the Boston City campus accredited VIEW testing centers. And in Namibia, we currently have 1 GED accredited VIEW testing center in Windhoek. The minimum testing age in South Africa and Namibia is 17 years. Now, students need to pay attention that internationally the testing age is 18, while in South Africa it is 17. Although when you set up a GED.com profile, when you start registering, it's going to give you an age alert if you're under the age of 18. I get asked a lot, I'm of testing age, why do I have an age alert? It's just international policy. GED does also offer disability accommodations. These a student can apply for together with the relevant medical reports. The GED also offers a GED Ready practice test. It is the only official practice test that is designed to assess how a student will do on the GED Ready test. It has the same look and feel as a GED test, and it gives students first-hand experience answering computer-based test questions that were written and developed by the test creators. from the practice test, the score report tells a student if they are likely to pass or if it is too close to call and they should continue studying before writing their test. Some nice things about the GED practice test. It's same-day scoring. It's half the length of the full test, so it takes about 45 minutes to complete, and it includes an enhanced score report. It is a test we really recommend students take before doing their final test. Many students think of it as a prelim test or a mock exam before their final exam. It's a lot cheaper than your final exam. It's 130 Rand plus VAT, and it really is a good indicator as to whether you're ready to write your final test. It's always recommended that you do your GED Ready practice test about 2 weeks before your final test. So there's not a big gap between. A question that I'm sure everyone is thinking, local certification. So SACWA is still accepting applications from GED students for a certificate of evaluation. We have on our ged.org.za website a step-by-step process on how students can apply to both SACWA and the NQA for their certificate of evaluation. The certificate of evaluation would state that SACWA has evaluated the GED and found the National Senior Certificate at NQF Level 4 as its closest comparable qualification. Similarly, the NQA, or the Namibian Qualifications Authority, has evaluated the GED and found it to be comparable to a certificate at NQF Level 4 of the National Qualifications Framework of Namibia. NQF Level 4 is obviously equal to grade 12. Now, a lot of students, there are options from the GED to study further, but recently, particularly in South Africa, a few extra hurdles have been introduced to students in terms of USAF and foreign conditional exemption. Now, if a student is looking at studying medicine, we are recommending that possibly the GED is not the best option for you with the 4 subjects. But if you are looking at going into the arts or commerce and you're open to maybe a further path towards getting to your degree application, then the GED is something to consider. At NQF Level 4, a lot of certificates and higher certificates do consider GED students. Now, on the GED.org website, we have tried to include as much information as possible for students, as well as resources in terms of an information guide that covers all information relating to the GED, the subjects, the test centers, the fees involved, everything, as well as how-to guides, how to set up a GED.com profile, how to register with SACWA, how to submit an application to the NQA, how to book a GED Ready practice test, as well as additional resources to help students prepare for their GED test. So we are here as the official representative of the GED, and our purpose is to help students in South Africa and Namibia with their GED, whether it be with questions relating to the GED, to monitor providers offering the GED, to also keeping students updated on any developments and changes, to engage with regulators. So if any students have any questions, be it about the GED or while they're studying the GED and have operational questions, they're welcome to contact us. Here are our contact details. We also publish or post all the latest information relating to any happenings relating to the GED on the GED Facebook pages, GED South Africa and GED in Namibia. And that's me.
Lindsay, thank you so much. Can I ask you just to keep your sharing on so that we can have those contact details on your on the site so that everyone can take them down while we discuss. Firstly, thanks so much for the presentation. It was very informative. What What we're going to be doing now is taking questions. We've received some questions and comments on the live YouTube channel, and so we're going to jump straight through to some questions. Let me just find those questions for you. I'm just going to open them here. Okay, so here's the first question. I think Lindsay, that's probably for you. It says, I'm a grade 11 learner in Namibia, and I'm going to be finishing this year, but I also want to do my grade 12 on GED. I'm assuming she's referring to rather doing the GED instead of the normal Namibian grade 12. What impact will this have on me finding work? Not to study, but to find work.
Okay, thanks for that. So in terms of the GED, what we would often recommend is if there's certain countries where employers don't always understand what the GED is, that would be where we would recommend a student such as yourself to complete the GED and then apply to the NQA for a certificate of evaluation. Because then when you go to your employer, and if they don't know what the GED is or what level it equates to in Namibia, then you've got your certificate of evaluation clearly stating what it equates to. I think another thing to bring up, what I didn't mention, is if a student is, we often get questions, my child is 14, not quite old enough to do the GED because the testing age is only 17. What can we do to lead up into the GED? And something we're recommending then is for students to consider the Cambridge IGCSE, because it's specifically designed for 14 to 16-year-olds. The Cambridge curriculum, in terms of the way it's developed, is quite similar to the GED in terms of it uses critical thinking skills. So it prepares the student, their learning style and their application of knowledge style would be similar, because it's already getting the student prepared in terms of learning the content, understanding the content, and applying that knowledge versus just rote learning and regurgitating.
Thanks, Lindsay. So the next question, I'm going to read out the question, but I don't think it's the appropriate place to answer. It's a bit too technical. It's saying, I'm currently doing the GED. Will the GED test go into specifics such as cells and atoms in the science test? Because currently the science program I'm doing only covers scientific investigations. That's from Dehan Jacobs. Dehan, we're going to reply to you. I'm going to get somebody to reply to you to provide this type of detail, but it's not, I don't think it's necessary to go into that type of detail on this webinar. So the next question is, does someone opening a learning center with students who are not his or her children have to have a teaching qualification? Boa, do you want to take that question?
Yes, most certainly. Okay, I think this talks about the flaws that we've got in our regulatory framework. So currently, you can either educate, the child can either receive his education at his own home, or he must go to a school. Now, let's say two families want to work together, and one parent teaches a number of sections and another parent teaches other subjects, and they do it at one of the houses of the two families. Then a child is now going to receive education not in his own home. So according to the law, that is now not home education. Therefore, those people are running a private school. But to register something like that as a private school is impossible, because the cost of regulatory compliance is just too high. So in terms of the law as it stands now, that is just not possible. There's no space for that. But despite of that, you've got many learning centers doing a diversity of things, but they're just not registered. But if you do that, you do run the chance of prosecution by government or things like that. So therefore, the Pestalozzi Trust also provides legal advice to such centers. So if you're considering that, contact the Pestalozzi Trust and we'll advise you on what's the best way to do this. But you must remember this will only be applicable for children of school-going age, that is from 7 to 15. But if you open a service, a center, for example, that offers services to prepare children for GED, for example, and they're over the age of 15, then the Schools Act doesn't apply anymore because you're not offering an education, you're just providing a preparation service for something else. And then there's no need to be a qualified teacher. And what's the other thing? Yeah, so the only things you must remember to comply with is, so I'm just talking about the Schools Act, what the Schools Act says about the situation, but also look at your local authority. They've also got regulations about you need to comply to certain conditions if you want to offer educational service from your own private home. So you must just look at your land use requirements of your local authorities. Thank you.
Thank you, Bo. I think just if you could just add to that, there's another question, so I think it just leads on from that, is how do you register for home education? I'm assuming they're referring to that they are a parent. How do they register their child for home education?
Yeah, the process is you complete a form, which is on the Department of Education's website, and you send that form to the Provincial Education Department. The problem with that process is, depending on what you want to do, there are conditions that they want you to comply with that might not be in the best interest of your child. So if you want to do a certain curriculum and the application form says, but this curriculum must be in line with CAPS, and you don't want to do that, it potentially can create a conflict situation. And that is why the Pestalozzi Trust there to help you with those conflict situations. So before you do that, you have to contact the Pestalozzi Trust.
Great, thank you. You're very busy today, Boa. Here's another one for you. Linda says, isn't it an inhibitor, the fact that year-end assessments are not formalized? I'm assuming she's referring to the younger grades where the end of the year exams are not necessarily formalized, whereas in school maybe they are, maybe they're not.
Okay, well, yeah, so I assume she talks about parents that want a year-end assessment. So if that is important to you as a parent, that you want a year-end assessment, then you must use the services of curriculum suppliers that do that. And there are many that do provide those services. So I don't think it's an inhibitor. There are other home education that don't believe in formal assessments. They believe that natural learning, that the child must explore his own interests and learn whatever that life comes up with. And they're not interested in assessments, and for them, that is actually an encouragement that it's not needed.
So I would assume that for the last couple of months, if somebody was interested in biology, this COVID-19 would have been the ideal time to learn about that and nothing else.
Yeah. But there are, parents do sometimes have a need just to give themselves a bit of confidence that my child is learning, but they don't follow, let's say, the CAPS curriculum. And so there is a need for curriculum independent assessment. And for that, currently the only thing you can do is to go to an educational psychologist to give you that. but we are working with joint ventures to find institutions that can give independent, let's say, curriculum independent assessment, just to guide parents.
Okay, great. Thank you. Lindsay, here's one for you, but maybe just at a very high level and just quickly, is what's the difference between the GED and Cambridge? When they say Cambridge, I'm assuming they're referring to the GCSEs and AS levels.
Okay, so very quickly, so the GED is an American grade 12 equivalent almost. Well, it is. The Cambridge curriculum is British based. The Cambridge is made up of the IGCSE, which is equivalent in South Africa to grades 10 and 12. From there, you progress onto AS level, which is equivalent to grade 12 in South Africa. And you can, if you want, go into full A level, which is considered equivalent to a 13th year of school or first year of matric. So you've got your British curriculum and the GED is your American curriculum.
Okay, and then following on from that, saying, won't it be difficult to find a job in South Africa, specifically considering that the GED only has, well, it says one subject, but that's not correct, that the GED only has 4 subjects?
So that's where you would apply to SACO for your certificate of evaluation. So when you're applying for a job, generally people don't say, how many subjects did you do in grade 12 and what did you get for your subjects? They ask, do you have a grade 12 or equivalent? And I think that's where it would come in.
Okay, and then leading on from that, there's a question, is the GED an American curriculum? So yes, the GED is American curriculum. And going on from there, it says, we mentioned, I'm not sure if it was you or Bo that mentioned that a matric qualification. When the GED is, I don't know what the right wording is, it's equivalent, or it's the closest equivalent to a matric. So the question is, does this mean my child will be able to study at a college or university in the USA or the UK?
Okay, so I can answer that. The GED is not a matric. The SACO evaluates the GED as being the closest comparable qualification to the National Senior Certificate. So you could almost say the GED is a matric equivalent. 98% of colleges and universities in America accept the GED, and they look at your marks that you achieved on the GED per subject. Ideally, you'd be wanting to get about 165 to upwards in your grades or in your scores. Certain universities or colleges, like I know New Zealand and Australia, they want the GED plus the SAT results, and then they're accepting students to university. So it depends on the university. We always say to students, check with the university where you want to study. But in America and a lot of countries internationally, the GED is accepted as entrance into university.
Okay, thank you. Bo, here's one for you. I think it's a very high-level question, but if you can answer it. You mentioned, or you spoke about an educational act versus a schools act. How far out is such a possibility?
Well, this whole thing came out of 2017 when the Bella Bill, so the Bella means Basic Education Law Amendment Bill, was published for public comment, and there was a enormous reaction from the public to that bill, with lots of objections, because the aim of the bill is to make home education much more under control of the government. The government will prescribe the detailed skills and contents of what home learners can learn, and therefore there was a huge reaction. And what then happened is we started engagements with members of parliament to discuss these objections. And then they asked us, but what do you want? So we realized we cannot only come up with objections to problems, we also have to propose a positive alternative. And this is a positive alternative that we in the Pestalozzi Trust, and we engage lots of people, suggest to open up the potential in the education space. So it's a proposal that we've developed, and we're trying to promote it to all the political parties that are willing to talk to us. So we regularly engage with political parties. One of the political parties has adopted this idea in their policy. We are anxiously seeing what the new policy of the Democratic Alliance is after the policy conference. Maybe we've discussed it with them as well. Maybe they've adopted it. I don't know. I hope so. But it's still a long road from proposing working out legislating reform and then promoting it to the political parties and then having it adopted by Parliament. That is a long road, and we need all the help we can get. So if you've got opportunities for us to promote this idea, we would appreciate it.
It's a very interesting proposal. It sounds very interesting, and hopefully we can discuss that further. All right, this is relating to a Namibian university. I think this is for you, Lindsay. A GED graduate has been admitted to a Namibian university. Did the student need to do any state testing to prove readiness, or did they just apply directly to the university?
So we have actually started engaging with universities in Namibia to grow the knowledge and the recognition of the GED. Several universities have said that students can apply direct to the university, and certain say they need to get the certificate of evaluation from the NQA. It really depends on the university. Each university in Namibia seems to have their own admission requirements, where in South Africa, all universities are governed by University South Africa.
Okay. I'm going to start just looking at a couple of questions. We're running out of time. We've only got a few minutes left. But one question here is it necessary to do all 4 subjects?
Most definitely. A student will only achieve the GED if they pass all 4 subjects, but you can study one subject at a time. So you can study one subject, write it, pass, and then move on to the next, but you do have to pass all 4.
Yes, I think that's actually quite an interesting comment. There's essentially, instead of having the pressure of having to write all your exams over a 1 or 2 week period like the National Senior Certificate, the GED takes a lot of pressure off the students, whereby the students can study for one subject, then they can book whenever they're ready. They don't have to wait for a specific date and time. They can choose their own date and time. They can go write that exam, pass it, write it off, and then move on to the next subject, thereby reducing a lot of stress and pressure on students.
I think it also gives students a lot of flexibility in terms of being able to write when they're ready versus being stuck to 1 or 2 exam sittings a year. It really allows the GED to fit into a student's life, whether they are trying to accelerate their schooling or they're a sports student who needs a flexible program. It is not a nice alternative in terms of its flexibility that it offers.
Yes, agreed. Just one comment before we end off. Unfortunately, we're running out of time, so we don't have the ability to go through all the questions. But here's a great comment. It's not really a question, and that's they're saying, so the 4 subjects in the GED is basically the subjects in public school, but just grouped into 4 exams. So I think, Lindsay, I mean, if you can just comment on that. I mean, I think they are correct in that. A lot of people think, well, there's only 4 subjects in the GED, so it's not as comprehensive. But I think their comment is absolutely right in that it covers a lot of different subjects within those 4 exams.
Correct. I think that's actually a really great way to look at it, because if you look at the science or the social studies test, they really cover multiple topics within the test. And those topics are normally individual subjects at a mainstream school, where here they've grouped them into one test.
Correct. I mean, we're at 4 o'clock. I just want to, if you don't mind, Lindsay and Boa, maybe just do 2 more questions, one for each of you. Boa, for you, there's quite an interesting comment. It's saying parents are finding it extremely difficult to have their children re-enter the public and private school system when they have been homeschooling them for the last couple of months. Do you have any suggestions on how to overcome this?
Yes, we haven't. We currently at the Pestalozzi Trust having lots of problems with people trying to get out of the school, and schools making it difficult by not issuing transfer certificates and that. But we expect this problem. Now, I just want to say that the law says that you cannot public schools must admit children. They cannot deny access to public schools because it's a right to education. So if they deny you access to schools without valid reasons, then that is something that the Pestalozzi Trust will assist with because it's illegal. They must admit you, and they may not use assessments for admission purposes, but they can use assessments for placing purposes. So the child has been out of the school, now it comes back, and now the question is, let's say the child is at the age of grade 5. Is the child right for grade 5? And the school says, well, it hasn't been in school, therefore we're going to put the child in grade 4, for example. And that is in instances like that, where assessments could be very a bit like curriculum independent assessments could be very worthwhile, saying, well, here's some evidence that my child has mastered all the skills necessary for grade 4, therefore the child is ready to enter into grade 5, to assist in that discussion. I hope that answers the question.
Yes, thank you. And just following on from that, I think this is the exact opposite of that. Haley is saying, how do you deregister from a formal school and register for homeschooling?
Yeah, the school must issue a transfer certificate saying that the child is now deregistered from the school. Therefore, the school will not stop reporting the child as delinquent or yet non-attendance, and sometimes schools don't want to issue that for various reasons, and they're difficult. And again, that is a conflict situation with which the Pestalozzi Trust then helps. Usually we just write a letter to the school, and suddenly when they get a letter from the Pestalozzi Trust, they give the transfer certificate immediately. Sometimes we have to send a more stern letter, and it takes a bit of more time, but in general it works. So when you get the transfer letter, you are then deregistered from the school, and they won't report the child as being absent anymore, and you won't be liable for school fees anymore.
Thank you. One last question, Lindsay. This is from, I think it's from Hannes. It's saying, so the GED is not for international universities. It's like a question. Students will have to write additional exams. What's the story with the GED and accessing international universities?
No, so the GED is most definitely a good acceptance tool for international universities. Like if a student often gets over 175 out of 200 for their GED or for some of their tests, they could actually even get some credits towards their course at some international universities, particularly American universities. So the GED is definitely a good test, particularly if you're looking at going to overseas or international universities. It is, especially in America, very highly recognized.
Thank you, Lindsay. Unfortunately, we have exceeded our time already. If you haven't had your question answered, please can you email us on info@ged.org.za and ask your question. we'll be more than happy to get the questions answered on your behalf. Thank you for attending this GED webinar and the homeschooling webinar. Boa, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate your expertise. Lindsay, thank you as well for your time. Have a wonderful evening, everybody, and hopefully we'll have further GED webinars similar to this in the future. If you have any ideas of specific topics that you want to have in a webinar, please let us know and we will consider them. Have a great evening. Thank you very much.